Welcome everybody. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes so we can get everybody from the waiting room actually into the chat. So just be patient with us and we'll be right with you. Right. We are half past the hour. So thank you for joining us. We'll get started kind of on time. I know there's a lot of ground to cover. Hello, good evening. My name is Brian Sauvé. I'm the president of the National Police Federation. On behalf of the NPF, I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight for this discussion on the important topic of public safety in Saskatchewan. As you may know, the NPF represents about 20,000 members of the RCMP across Canada and internationally, including over 1,700 here in Saskatchewan. We are focused on improving public safety for all Canadians, including our members, by advocating for much-needed investments in the public safety continuum. Saskatchewan and the RCMP have a long shared history. Since 1885, all members of the RCMP have called Saskatchewan a home. To introduce our panel, public safety works well when we all work together. It's in that spirit that we're hosting this forum with representatives from various backgrounds to have a fulsome conversation about the importance of having a public safety plan for Saskatchewan. As the province grows and evolves, our approach to safety must adapt as well. Today's speakers will share their insights and innovative perspectives. Saskatchewan is right in the middle of a provincial election, and we hope that this conversation tonight is only the beginning of a longer conversation of working together for a safer Saskatchewan. We encourage everyone to feel free to ask questions throughout the event. There will be a Q&A session at the end. Please note this event is being recorded and posted for those who are unable to join us this evening. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator and our panelists. Our moderator tonight is Morgan Buckingham. Morgan is a board director with the NPF and a staff sergeant with the RCMP. He has over 22 years of diverse policing experience, both frontline, plainclothes, investigative units, human resources, and labor relations. Assistant Commissioner Blackmore, Rhonda Blackmore, joined the RCMP in 1995. Spent the first 7 years of her career in Saskatchewan performing general duty policing in Assiniboia, Regina, and Buffalo Narrows. Assistant Commissioner Blackmore took command of the Saskatchewan RCMP as its commanding officer on April 12, 2021. Chief Rick Bourassa, he's the police chief of the Moose Jaw Police Service. Over his impressive 45-year career in policing in Saskatchewan, he served with the Regina Police, as well as the Minister of Justice before taking on his current role in 2013. He's also the past president of the Saskatchewan Association of Chiefs of Police, a member of the board of directors of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, chair of the Criminal Intelligence Service Saskatchewan Provincial Executive Committee, and a member of the National Executive Committee of Criminal Intelligence Services Canada. And finally, to round out our panel, we have Jason Stonechild. Jason currently serves as Executive Director of Justice for the Federation of Saskatchewan Indigenous Nations. Jason has been with the FSIN for 3 years following his retirement as the Deputy Chief of Police in Prince Albert. Jason has also served as President of the Prince Albert Police Association and Vice President of the Saskatchewan Federation of Police. With the FSIN, Jason works with the Saskatchewan chiefs and leaders to enhance community safety, wellness, and equity for First Nations communities and peoples across the province through the implementation and protection of inherent and treaty rights. The FSIN serves 74 First Nations and 10 tribal agencies within the province. So thank you all for being here tonight, and I will pass it over to Morgan to get the show on the road.
Great, thanks, Brian. As Brian said, my name is Morgan Buckingham. I'm a second-generation Saskatchewan police officer, born and raised in this province. Happy to be here and engage you tonight on public safety in this great province. I'll be moderating the conversation with our esteemed panelists, who will briefly open up to pretty quickly. And I'm going to start with some direct questions to them, just to get them talking, loosen up the conversation a little bit. And then I'd like to turn it over to you, the viewer. So if you have questions, if you're on Facebook, we encourage you to go over to the Zoom chat, register, and get on there. And if you're in the Zoom chat, we'll get you to if you have a question that you want us to ask these panelists, put it in the Zoom feature, the chat feature, and put your name, where you're from, and your question. And we'll get to the questions in the second half of the show. We're here tonight to talk about public safety in Saskatchewan. And as we are in the middle of a provincial election, many of our questions will be how the provincial government can play their part in improving public safety. I want to remind the audience that this is nonpartisan. We're not endorsing any particular party. We're not trying to influence anybody to vote in any particular way. We want to open up a dialogue that will educate you about public safety in this province and maybe give you some education before you head to the polls. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Chief Rick Bourassa. Rick, welcome.
Thank you, Morgan. A pleasure to be here.
Rick, I understand that you've recently announced your retirement. 45 years, or half a century, I guess, of policing in this great province. Regina City Police and Moose Jaw Police. Congratulations.
Yes, that's correct. I started with Regina in 1981 and left there to go to the Ministry of Justice for a couple of years and came here in 2013 as the chief.
Fantastic. Great career and congratulations on retirement. And my first question to you is going to kind of cover that time span. So Rick, in your experience, and you have a lot of it, how would you say that the nature of crime has changed in Saskatchewan over the last 45 years?
So thanks for that question, Morgan. And yeah, I've seen a lot of changes over the past half century. Thank you very much. One of the biggest ones it was sort of a migration of a lot of criminal activity into the digital world, into a world that we refer to as cybercrime. and things work and very and have to be integrated with country. We've seen that even move I go through as but increases in I'll let
Here in Saskatchewan, I were 2000.
Some of them like crime, but there are total crime. Basic, pretty dramatic. 8 year, 6,000 incidents, roughly 4 Saskatchewan provinces, violence, and significant increase has approximately 100,000 people. And we're above that average per 100 that works here in Canadian per point. Is see the seriousness of crime, but also the amount of crime and the impact that has on our police officers here in Saskatchewan.
Oh yeah, thank you, Rhonda. And I hear that from our membership. Obviously, through my role, I engage our membership quite regularly, and definitely hear that the heavy workload that they're carrying and the hard work that they're doing. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that your comments and your stats will probably open up some other questions as we move along. So next, I'm going to move on to Jason Stonechild. So Jason, as we heard in your bio, you've served with the Prince Albert Police Service for 27 years. Prince Albert, my hometown. Hopefully we didn't cross paths when I was younger, but after that, you became Director of Justice for the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, FSIN. So for those who may be unfamiliar with what your role is, can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do at the FSIN?
Right on. Thank you, Morgan. And good evening to all the participants, and good evening to my fellow panelists. And unlike Rick, I haven't been involved in policing for a half a century, but I've been involved with policing not only in my former role, but my current role for about 30 plus years, a little bit south of that. And I could say right now I'm in a position where I represent a portion of the population where, the statistics, the science behind the statistics show here in Saskatchewan, more so than anywhere else in Canada, there's disproportionate representation across the board for First Nations. First Nations represent 15 to 16% of the population here in Saskatchewan. And at times throughout recent history, I'd reach out to a neighboring organization like the RCMP or Corrections or the Moose Jaw Police Service, and I've pulled statistics. And I could tell you that there's been times over the last couple of years where 80 to 85% of those in federal corrections were First Nations. There was a portion of time 2 years ago where 100% of female inmates in the province were First Nations, and 100% of young offenders in this province were First Nations. And I would suggest currently it's 67% of federal inmates are First Nations here in the province. Still a very discouraging statistic. I would suggest right across the board, right from police contacts, right from criminality to victimization, to homicides, to serious crime, there's a disproportionate representation of First Nations. So positions like myself are essentially important because the solution to get around those stats and make change will come from the grassroots. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, the FSIN, as I'll refer to tonight, it's a wonderful organization. As a police officer, I had limited knowledge about it, but since my retirement, I've come to know that it's a grassroots organization that takes direction directly from the chiefs and the leaders of our communities. 3 times a year, we have assemblies where every chief in the province, approximately 100, will amalgamate, and they'll listen to work that we've done to try to make strategic change and give us direction and feedback. And it's very much like government for me to try to recommend change or strategy for justice. There's 3 different levels of governance, from the Indian Justice Commission to the Indian Governance Commission, right to the Legislative Assembly. So it takes a lot of work. It takes about a 6-month to a year process before I get approval from the Legislative Assembly in order to work in a good way in a certain direction. A former chief of Cowessess First Nation, Cadmus Delorme, he does a lot of public engagements, and I really respect the man. He summed it up really well one time, speaking to a class with the RCMP. He said that prior to colonization, our people led a very pure, clean life. We were in a canoe going down a river, and it was very clean. It was very smooth. And then during colonization, our partners who came to Canada, they also had a canoe. And then as time evolved, their canoe became more modern. Their canoe became more equipped and more capable. And then it became motorized. So they started to take off down the river a lot faster than what we're able to do. And what my role is, and the FSIN's role is to fight for inherent and treaty rights and try to equalize the opportunity while traveling down that river and have the same type of equipment, the same type of capability as our partners that we share the land with. So that's just a couple comments on the FSIN. It's a wonderful grassroots organization. And in this capacity, I work with many of our nation's leaders who are entrenched in the negative, a lot of positive, but a lot of negative statistics surrounding crime and justice.
Thank you, Jason. Those are, for a lot of us who've heard those stats and a lot of us who haven't, you are right, they are very disturbing statistics. And, I think that Saskatchewan residents, government, and policing experts in this province want to know what are some things that we could do to help those stats and help change that and help the shift. So thank you very much. And I'm sure I have some questions that we're going to get into that a little bit more as we move on. And for anybody just dialing in, just a reminder, this is the National Police Federation. We're here talking with Chief Rick Bourassa of Moose Jaw Police, Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore of the RCMP, Commanding Officer of F Division, and Executive Director of Justice, Jason Stonechild with the FSIN. For this next section, I'm going to be asking some specific questions of each of you. So if I ask Jason a question, I'll look for a response from Jason. But what I would like is Rhonda and Rick to also jump in, and vice versa for each of you as we move through. Again, for anybody viewing on Zoom, if you have questions, go to the Zoom chat, add just your first name, where you're from, what is your question, and we'll try and get to those, as many as we can, hopefully, because we want you to have your say and get your questions answered by these esteemed panelists. So Rick Bourassa, we'll jump back to you. What additional resources or support would you like to see from the provincial government to enhance the effectiveness of your policing services?
Thanks, Morgan. And I just want to acknowledge Jason's very astute observations about what some of the big challenges are in our province here, and the challenges of rectifying those, and I'm going to use the term disparities that have just grown multi-generationally, and which have led to a lot of the challenges that we see here. In policing, we tend to work with people that have come through trauma and often multi-generational trauma, and they become the people that we work with the most. And so to answer your question, the areas that we would really like to see some movement on would be addressing some of those issues that Jason has spoken of. And I'll make it a little more simplistic here. What we deal with a lot of times is people that are dealing with trauma, that have been traumatized, and it's been sometimes multi-generational trauma. And the outcomes of that are real struggles with mental health, real struggles with addictions. And in the policing world, even though we've talked about crime, the vast majority of what we deal with as police officers is not crime. It's related to those other issues around, I'll use the term social disorder. It's not the best term, but that's the one I'll use right now. But very often related to those challenges that come with mental health disorders, with addictions disorders. And we are very often the frontline responders to those challenges. Without the resources, without the skills, without the proper training to address those as we would like to see them addressed. So one of the areas that we have seen some movement on, and I believe we need a lot more movement on, is in that area of mental health and addictions, not only treatments, but in proactive work in the community, providing the supports for people in the community that need those supports. And right now, we are those frontline supporters. I give every compliment in the world to the province for moving us forward with police and crisis teams, which have been invaluable in providing some of those frontline resources. But that takes away policing resources from dealing with other issues. So that's one of the key areas I would look to increase in the short term police and crisis team involvement across the province, and in the long term to make sure that there are proper treatments and proper community supports in place for people that require those.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess Rhonda, Jason, anything to add in regards to additional resources or support that you would like to see from the provincial government to enhance the effectiveness of your policing services?
Well, from my perspective, I would just say, we're a little bit different given that we are in rural and remote communities in much of the province. And we are in some municipal areas as well, but we do have those rural and remote areas that we need to police. So when you talk about police crisis teams to help with mental health issues, we don't have that ability because the Saskatchewan RCMP covers 99% of the geography of this province. That's 651,000 square kilometers. Very significant area that we have to cover. And so we can't have that same environment that we do in a municipal setting. And that's why we look to some innovative solutions. And in that area, what we have done is put psychiatric nurses within our operational communication center. So when our members are dealing with an individual who's experiencing a mental health crisis, they can call in for that expertise. So it may not be right beside them as it might be in a municipal setting, but they have access to that information over the phone. Oftentimes, the individual experiencing the crisis can talk to the nurse directly on the phone and have that crisis determined if this individual needs further care, or maybe they just need referral to certain resources. So we have to be a little bit innovative sometimes when it comes to more remote and rural communities in the province, but we do our best to try to equalize some of those services out where we can with innovative use of resources.
Good. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, I do want to mention that since I came into my role and learned my role very well, two organizations stand out in mind that really came forward and said, we want to learn from the chiefs. We want to talk to you, present to our staff. And that's Moose Jaw Police Service during a leadership internal meeting. And that's also the RCMP on many occasions, inclusive, in addition to the Saskatchewan Federation of Police. And so I do want everybody to know that you have two of the best police leaders, definitely in Western Canada, but I think they're well known across the nation. And here at home, coming from a person who sometimes have to hold police or try to hold police accountable, they are good community-based leaders. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Rhonda and Rick said, but I will add this, that you cannot proactively address community issues without stabilizing the community. We have tried many strategies over the years. Former chief and current chief of Edmonton Police Service, Dale McPhee, implemented a program that he garnered from Europe, I believe, in the hub and the core, that got a lot of ground and got a lot of traction, but quite frankly, you couldn't measure success. The PAC teams, scientifically that works, but how do you measure when you take a teaspoon out of a pail of water? What I can say is statistically, we keep trying these innovative approaches to deal with community issues, and the stats continue to get worse. The crime severity index in Saskatchewan is disproportionate. So I would suggest that before you continue to invest in those community-based programs, I think of Howard Johnson, I think of E. Fry, a lot of those great Homeward Bound in Prince Albert, lots of those great community-based approaches to help individuals reform and reintegrate. But we need to stabilize. And no matter what happens, whether there's a mistake made by PACT or death in custody, nobody looks at it. Everybody looks at police. So whenever there's an issue or breakdown, police are going to own it. So what I'm saying is I think there needs to be robust funding and recruitment so that we could fill seats for police across the province. Keeping in mind, Indigenous policing, self-administered policing is on the horizon. We have to prepare for that. With more resources, we could stabilize the people who own the problem 100% of the time, and that's police. Once we have better statistics, then there should be robust funding into community-based rehabilitation programs.
Thank you all for those great answers. Next question I'm going to move on to is technology. I want to keep this moving along. And this is for Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore. And I can speak from experience talking with members of the public. I know that you really do lead the country it's at least in the RCMP, when it comes to keeping up with technology and equipment. And I'll speak to the drone program. I know that you have another term for it, but I'm just going to use the word drone for the purpose of this forum. And I have seen situations where these drones that you've put out, you've implemented, you've got out to every single detachment in this province have saved lives, literally saved lives. And big kudos to you for doing that, getting those out there. And I think you took a little heat from Ottawa for that, but you're saving lives, and kudos to you. So my question to you on technology and equipment, I guess, what types of investments in technology and equipment would you like the provincial government to prioritize to help police services perform more effectively?
Yeah, our remotely piloted aircraft program is a great example, Morgan. Between January and the end of August, we had 574 deployments of our RPAS or drones across the province. And as Morgan said, there's a cost up front to that, but you have to look at the cost that we're saving, not only time saving, but how do you put a price on human life? We've saved individuals who were lost in a snowstorm. We've saved individuals who were caught in rushing water when a flood situation happened overnight. So huge return on investment, even though there is that initial cost. And I think that's one of the big things for us here at the RCMP. As I said, in some of those remote areas, you have to work innovatively. You can't necessarily use the same equipment or resources as you would in a municipal setting. And so things like our drones have been game changers for us, absolute game changers. One of the things I think where the biggest issues come with investment is the continuous modernization of that equipment. So sometimes we get a little maybe complacent. Okay, we purchased that equipment, you're good, and call us in 30 years. The problem is technology is changing so rapidly that in order to keep up with changing technology and making sure that we are at the leading edge is really critically important, and we have to remember that it's not just buy the equipment and put it out of mind. And the reason I say we need to be leading edge is because the criminals are leading edge. We like to think of all criminals as being these dumb criminals. You would be absolutely amazed to know some of the technology that they utilize to their advantage, including GPS trackers and all types of technology that they use to their advantage. And we really need to be at that front end of technology. And so we need to see that continual investment in modernization. And that includes not only our use of force equipment, our less lethal equipment. We have CWs that people would commonly know as tasers, or we call them conducted energy weapons, which are modernizing all the time, improving, getting more effective, able to deploy more than one cartridge, all of those types of fail-safes that come with that equipment. We have less lethal weapons that are from distance. And so we need to continually update that equipment. But then there's also things such as, like I mentioned, GPS tracking, our drones, our UAVs, all of those pieces of equipment that really allow us to police some of these remote areas far more effectively and more efficiently. And I think when people look at the overall picture, not just the bottom line of what it cost, but the overall cost savings and the savings when it comes to public safety, the increase that we can add to public safety, it's really a no-brainer when it comes to investing in that technology.
Perfect, thank you. Rick or Jason, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. Thanks, Rhonda, for that. A couple of the areas in terms of technology that we're advancing in, but we could certainly use some more supports in that, is one of the areas is in criminal intelligence. Our members gather the data, The system that's been used is being updated. It'll be a brand new system. The challenge we have here in Saskatchewan is we could always use more analysts to actually do the analytical work on that. It's technological, but it still needs that human analytical side. So we would certainly be supportive of additional analyst positions applied to Criminal Intelligence Service Saskatchewan. At the same time, the integrated units that we used to have in the province that were disbanded a number of years ago, to reintegrate all of us across the board. We have this unbelievable working arrangement in Saskatchewan with all of our policing partners. And to reestablish those integrated units and have all of that technology used to support all of us, because there are no borders in our world, but to support all of us would be very, very effective.
Thanks, Rick. I worked in those integrated units. I worked in the Regina Integrated Drug Unit and the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, and very effective units. We worked, I remember doing files everywhere from La Loche down to Estevan and everywhere in between. So thank you for that, Jason.
Yeah, I don't have much more to ask, aside from the obvious. I was having a conversation with somebody today about the future of policing, First Nations policing, and the comment was about how it's going to be enhanced for First Nations when we have self-administered police. And I agree. The community-based approach will be enhanced. However, I think of incidents like James Smith, where we talk about resourcing challenges, we talk about response times, and that's a challenge when you have such a large area, as Rhonda mentioned, in order to respond to calls. However, in times of great need, you need well-established police services, well-resourced, where the RCMP and some of the larger municipalities, they could deploy 100-200 members, right from SWAT, right from reconstruction investigations, right to identification, and they have the resources entrenched in their history that really make the difference and bridge the gap that's needed across the board. One of the biggest complaints that would, or one of the biggest things that would assist me in complaints I receive is body-worn cameras. And I understand the challenges with regards to implementing and pushing that forward. But I think if there needs to be a heavy investment by the government, that needs to be a priority.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think the one thing that a lot of people don't realize with body-worn cameras, Jason, is you have the initial cost up front of a body-worn camera. And again, body-worn camera is great for accountability for everybody, great for everybody to really get a first row view of what actually happened there. But aside from your cost of that camera up front, you have cost to upgrade it, you have the storage cost, you have somebody's got to go through and vet that or blur out other people's faces. There's all kinds of different costs that come with that, right? So, but it's going to be a very valuable tool, I think. So I'm going to move on next to you, Jason. Direct question to you. How can the provincial government better support preventative programs aimed at addressing the root causes of crime, such as poverty, addiction, and social instability?
Yeah, right. So how can they better invest? How can they better address? I think in Saskatchewan, we're leading the way with some of the working groups, with some of the solutions that are I'm seeing being implemented in communities. My answer is not only for the provincial government, but for policing in general. I think that I'll never take away from some of the grassroots community-based organizations. They're so important. And I speak on behalf of First Nations. Half of the population are within the municipalities. The other half are within the First Nations, within the nations, the 74 that Rhonda alluded to, and they attend. There needs to be some sort of mechanism to have proactive attendance to deal with community issues. I know that on our First Nations that are rural, we've come up with some innovative strategies with the RCMP, like the Traffic Safety Partnership Program, which is an agreement between the RCMP and SGI here in Saskatchewan. It creates a fund to be able to have traffic members come into a community and overwhelm it. And so when we have a First Nations in crisis because of gang violence or, addictions or whatever the case may be, a chief has the ability to make a request for additional resources that doesn't impact the current CTAs, doesn't impact their budget. The funding has been found elsewhere. And it allows uniformed, highly visible members to go into the community and, have a very strong visible presence. Now, we don't get involved with whether discretion is used or not, but what it does do, it's a broken windows theory of policing, where if you address the antisocial behavior and you have high presence on every street corner, it's going to calm things down. We've implemented this strategy about 21 times since we agreed upon it, and every time there's been 100% feedback on how positive that is. So now when I look at the RCMP and the provincial government, I see that you have a CRT team, Crime Response Reduction Unit, where they are overtly targeting criminal activity that is apparently flooding, while it is flooding many of our First Nations. What a wonderful team. And I would love to be able to have that specific to First Nations to address some of our issues. We have the CSO program, which is gaining traction here in the province. It's a second tier of policing, and it's a great introduction into potential prospect of fully self-administered policing. And so I guess also there needs to be heavy investment in recruitment and retention. As I understand, speaking to my colleagues in police leadership positions, it's a real challenge right now to fill all the seats on the bus. You have services stealing from other services. You have the Marshal Service, who's apparently on the horizon. I couldn't comment because I don't know much about the discussion surrounding marshals. But what I will say is that there needs to be a comprehensive strategy in order to hire people who are married to communities, who reflect communities, are invested in communities, and fill every seat in the bus so that we could reduce response times and enhance communication with our policing partners. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jason. Very good points. And actually, Rhonda, I'm going to steer the conversation over to you. A couple points that Jason had made regarding recruiting and putting people into communities that belong in those communities. I'd like maybe you to touch on the Indigenous recruiting unit that you've created here in Saskatchewan. I'd also, another point that came out of Jason's comments was the CRT teams, which falls under the greater Serious Enforcement Response, or SERT team. That's an RCMP team that I think handles crime reduction teams, warrant apprehension teams, human trafficking. So maybe I'll turn that over to you to talk about how some of those tie into this.
Sure. So just over 2 years ago, in August of 2022, I created a Indigenous recruiting unit. We stood that up. They have been incredibly successful in this province in attracting applicants to the RCMP from our Indigenous communities. It's very important that we are representative of the communities we police. And as Jason mentioned, 74 First Nations, fastest growing demographic in this province are Indigenous people. And we are not where we need to be when it comes to being representative of that population. And so the reason why we have that specific recruiting unit is because historically, I think some of the mistrust between Indigenous people and police, and you heard Jason talk about the very disproportionate statistics that we see when it comes to population percentages versus incarceration rates. Some of that mistrust, because of that, I think there's maybe a tendency for Indigenous youth to not think of policing as a career. And we felt it was really important that they understood that absolutely this is a career available to Indigenous people. Back in the early 2000s, in Saskatchewan, the two visionaries, the commanding officer of the day, Harper Boucher, and the individual who was in charge of what was then called Aboriginal Policing Services. Some of you may have heard of him. His name's Russ Morasti. They came up with a brilliant idea to put 3 all-Indigenous troops through Depot. All of them were from Saskatchewan. All of them returned to Saskatchewan, and they have done incredible things in their careers. The problem is now we're closing in on that 25-year mark where they may be looking to leave the RCMP and retire. And so we need to make sure that we are filling that void and continuing to be representative of the population. So our Indigenous recruiting unit has done an amazing job at attracting Indigenous applicants to the RCMP. I think, as Jason mentioned, there's several benefits. One, it as I mentioned, is representative of the populations we police. It helps to have a better understanding of some of the issues within those communities. But it also, in the future, as First Nations look at moving to self-administered policing, it offers an opportunity for those agencies as they're created to have experienced police officers, which is amazing. Instead of trying to initiate a police service and looking for individuals who would be brand new, you'd have that experienced policing ability. So I think it's a great initiative. We've seen all kinds of success. We've got 3 of our Indigenous applicants are going through Depot right now, and they're doing a fantastic job. I can't wait until they graduate and return to their communities here in Saskatchewan and show us exactly all the great things they can do. When it comes to CERT, as Morgan mentioned, that's our crime reduction teams, our warrant enforcement teams, and our trafficking response teams. They are great because we can send them in and they are not responding to calls. They go in targeting warrant enforcement targets and individuals. So they look at the top 60 individuals in the province, sort of the worst individuals, the biggest threat to public safety. I would say that those most intent on doing harm in our communities, and that's who they target. And so they start at the top and they target those individuals to apprehend them. Some of these individuals are unlawfully at large. They haven't followed conditions. They're breaching conditions. They've recently committed crimes, violent crimes. And so they're apprehending them. But they don't get called away to a day-to-day call because they can focus on that. Similar to what Jason mentioned, our crime reduction teams can saturate a community and they can go in, and whether it be condition checks or curfew checks or whatever they're doing to initiate that enforcement action, they can take that next level enforcement action. And they're often executing warrants, doing searches, and they are getting an incredible amount of drugs, people who have violated their conditions and are violent offenders, and again, taking them off our streets. So lots of success there. And Rick had referred earlier to the integration portion, and we've recently added 2 Moose Jaw city police officers to our crime reduction team out of Moose Jaw. And I really do believe that integration is the way to go. You know, the criminals don't stop at a municipal border or a provincial border. They see it all as opportunity, unfortunately, and we need to be able to make sure we're working together, something we do exceptionally well here in this province in policing. And when we're formally integrated, it's even more effective. So lots of really positive things happening with those teams.
Fantastic, Rhonda. Thank you. And Rick, I'll get you if you have anything quickly to add, and then I'm going to steer it over to the public questions that are coming in from our viewers after that.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. Yes, and Rhonda, thank you so much for creating that integrated Moose Jaw crime reduction team. They're going full bore already. So, and I just want to follow up. So Jason had mentioned visibility and police presence in communities, and that is so fundamentally important. We have worked very closely with the province over the last number of years. One of the challenges that we have here in Saskatchewan is police are very often expected to, in provincial court, and this is in both urban and rural jurisdictions across this province, to act as prosecutors, to provide court security, and to manage the people that are in custody, not only transporting them, but guarding them while they're at court. And that across this province takes thousands of police hours out of communities every year. And every day there are many, many police officers that are tied up on these non-policing functions. So I think I'm going to answer your last question here quickly. If I had one wish, what would it be? And that would be that those police officers be relieved of those duties and put back out in the communities, and other agencies look after what would be their mandate to deal with those court issues. I think we'd see we would see a significant increase in the number of police officers in our communities doing what the police should be doing. We are happy that we've had good conversations with the province moving forward, and we hope that that continues.
Great, thank you so much. You know what, and I wish we had 8 hours to sit here and talk, because you guys have so much to say, so much experience, so much knowledge. I'm going to turn it over to some questions from the viewers here. Just for reminder for anybody who maybe just dialed in from on Facebook or onto the Zoom call, I'm here with Rick Bourassa, Chief of Moose Jaw Police, Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore, Commanding Officer of F Division, and with Jason Stonechild, Executive Director, Justice at FSIN. So the first question again, and this is for any of you, please jump in and answer. This is probably going to be tied to Rhonda because Rhonda gave the stats. This is coming from Juanita, and Juanita asked, for Saskatchewan to have such a high crime rate, what supporting systems are missing here compared to other jurisdictions?
That's a great question. And I think it comes down to some of those social issues that we really need to focus on. These crime stats, while they're increasing, this is nothing new. We've been in that top spot, unfortunately, and in crime severity for almost as long as Stats Canada has been reporting. So it's a historical issue. And I think in the last number of years, there is starting to be a focus on some of those root causes. Policing is one thing, enforcement is one pillar, but there also needs to be all of those other pieces, prevention when it comes to addictions issues, and support, and being able to get people out of gang activity. All of those pieces have to come together. And it's just, I would say in the last number of years that everyone is truly starting to look at those root causes so that we can address those, and hopefully we can see some of these numbers decline.
Perfect, thank you very much. And just tied to that, Arnie asks, hello, is the crime stats the same for rural and urban, or is one higher than the other?
No, there's actually a significant disparity. There's actually a lower rate within many of our municipalities, and we see that higher rate in our some of our rural and some of our remote communities. I will say for us, the RCMP, we have 3 districts in the province. We have the North, Central, and South districts, and our highest crime rate in the North is in the North, and it's 6.4 times higher in the North than our rural crime rate in the South. So we see that significant increase. And unfortunately, those are some of the most remote locations where we also, to my earlier point, don't have access to those mental health supports, to those addiction supports, and where that focus really needs to be on some of those root causes.
Perfect, thank you, Rhonda. I'm going to jump to a Facebook question. Donald asks, should all police be required to wear body cams? Maybe Rick, I'll get you to start that one out.
That's certainly a direction that we are moving towards. We think it's incredibly valuable. In this day and age, video is everything. It tells the whole story. And we think for accountability reasons, it would be ideal. I think, Morgan, you had raised the challenges around the storage, the retrieval, the disclosure. What that will do is that will put police budgets up, and we'll have to add additional resources to do all that work, because it is very labor-intensive work. But definitely the direction that we all want to go to. And it's just working through the budgeting process and all those sort of intricacies of what's involved that is slowing it down a little bit. The budgeting process is pretty significant. The body cameras, purchasing that is really an insignificant cost, but it's all of that back end work that's really a challenge and will require additional resources.
Great, thank you so much. Jason, any thoughts on the body-worn cameras?
Yeah, of course. Back when I was a president, I had a young officer who had a complaint, a public complaint, and he was really upset because he felt it was captured on camera. He felt it didn't capture the substance of the interaction. So when I think of body worn cameras, I think of when you take your typical police officer and they work a 12-hour shift, they could, in a municipality, they could have 2, 3, 4,000 contacts unknowingly with the public. Every time they drive down the street, every time they get out of their vehicle, they're being observed. And I think that the public, because of social media, and Chief Bourassa mentioned that some of the new challenges with technology, we as a society see a lot of negative police occurrences. They seem to take the headlines. It's interesting media, so it seems to make the front page of a local paper. But I just wish there's a vehicle where people could see just the excellent work that the greater majority of police. So I believe body-worn cameras are essential for, the couple incidents a year where, there's an incident that should be examined. Maybe police could learn from it, or maybe there needs to be a significant correction because it affects public safety and confidence. But I believe truly that when body cameras are, a common practice, it will dispel so many complaints. It'll allow a complainant who maybe wasn't irrational at the time of a complaint to review an incident real time, listen to the conversation, and have an opportunity to say, yeah, you know what? Okay, I get it. Let's move forward, or else for the public to see just how excellent a lot of our police are. So it may sound like I'm a big supporter of police, and I will start by saying that I'm a big supporter of police. No matter where we are, First Nations, with regards to our views on colonization and policing, we always need law, order, and policing, whether that's from current practices or some revitalization of some of our historic laws. But to answer your question directly, it's essential. And I think it's really going to dispel a lot of the, questionable conducts or interactions with the public, and also be able to, for the police to show the excellent work that's being done.
Perfect. Questions are starting to pile in now as time winds down, but we'll try and get to as many as we can here. I'm going to get as quick of an answer as possible from you guys on this one. It's aimed at Rhonda. So Daryl and Prince Albert asked for Assistant Commissioner Blackmore. Since you mentioned experienced officers, it seems bureaucracy is bogging down the application process for experienced members. What steps have been taken and are being taken to expedite the process for experienced members who want to patch over? And Jason and Rick, you can talk a little bit about recruitment challenges as well on this one in general.
Yeah, our experienced police officers, historically, we haven't had a lot of interest here at Saskatchewan RCMP. That is starting to change, and we've seen a bit of an uptick in the interest from some from within the province, some from outside of the province. And we are getting things much more coordinated. There's some pieces in there. The RCMP has a requirement for certain medical requirements with specific doctors that are approved through processes. And so we're trying to streamline that. And I think we're doing a much better job at getting rid of some of that bureaucracy so that we can process applicants much quicker than we have been historically.
I'll just quickly add that it's very important for recruitment and to look at experienced members, but I'm concerned about it simply for the fact that First Nations policing isn't funded like municipalities like the RCMP, and a common trend across Canada is a First Nations police service will get a member who's awesome. They get them trained, they send them on expensive training, they invest 5-10 years in them, and then as soon as they can, they're off to a big municipality that pays quite a bit more than the capabilities. So it's I think it's really important, but I'm also concerned as I think into the future for First Nations policing.
And I'll just add in there from the municipal side, of course, the vetting process is fundamentally important, and we have to make sure that we're engaging people that bring the right character to our police services. In our world, the municipal world, we are bound by the municipal police recruiting regulations, and there are some barriers in there for experienced members to leave one police service and come to another police service, which we will be working with the Saskatchewan Police Commission on addressing some of those things like physical testing and things like that. When people are actually performing police functions quite well in another jurisdiction, we can't just engage them. They have to go back through this long vetting process. So we believe it can be streamlined. They're longer conversations. We are having those discussions and seeing if we can streamline that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. This one comes from Sandra in Regina. There was a letter from approximately 100 Saskatchewan cities, towns, villages, rural municipalities, organizations with questions on the integration of the Saskatchewan Marshal Service with existing law enforcement agencies. Can all of you articulate some of the concerns that your agencies may have?
I can start, Morgan, if that's okay, seeing that I was the first one to hit the unmute button, apparently. So, as I said before, we have had an historically excellent relationship in Saskatchewan with all of the police services, municipal, RCMP, First Nations. We work together extremely well. I will speak for myself, but I think I echo this sentiment with others. We have some concerns about another agency that would add a level of bureaucracy to, and that's not even the right word. But right now we have a system that works extremely well. We're integrated very well. We work together very well. And our wish would be that the resources would be deployed to the existing police services. We already have the history. We've got the training, the experience. We understand this province. And so our wish would be that those resources are directed towards the existing police services.
Rhonda, Jason.
I'll go next. It's too bad we only have a short period of time to talk about this, but quite frankly, I don't know much about the marshals aside from, my understanding of policing. What I will say is that it's been a 30+ year assembly resolution on behalf of the FSIN chiefs to explore First Nations policing. It's been a 30+ year resolution to eliminate racism, systemic racism within justice system actors. We've been asking and lobbying and advocating for these serious issues surrounding police for 30+ years. It's a significant priority for our First Nations. And I think because of the statistics, we're a major stakeholder, and it's our inherent and treaty right to have equity and justice that aligns with our interests. Not once has the provincial government or anybody from the provincial government consulted with the First Nations. I don't think there's a robust study leading up to a commitment to dedicate $30 million of taxpayers' money to the Marshal Service. I don't see very clear governance structure. I don't see who they're accountable to, and I don't see how they could create a policy so they have jurisdiction in First Nations lands, but they're going to be challenged without consulting with one of the most important stakeholders. It's our treaty right, and I don't think there is any forethought into speaking with the group or the population that is at sometimes 80% affected by criminality and by victimization in this province. I think the theory behind it of enhancing policing and focusing on high-risk offenders, fantastic. But we have got a historic arrangement with the municipalities that exist. We have a historic arrangement with the RCMP working on our lands, and nobody's talked to First Nations chiefs regarding this. And I'm not talking about taking one community and or one tribal agency. This is a FSIN legislative assembly discussion that requires a consensus and very deep stakeholder consultation with people who have treaty rights. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Jason. Anything to add, Rhonda?
Well, from our perspective, we're still, I guess, waiting to see exactly what that mandate's going to look like for the marshals. And we've heard, sort of that broad statements of deter, detect, disrupt crime. But what specifically does that look like? What is their model going to look like? Where are they going to work? What does it look like when they deal with an offender in a certain community? Are they going to take that prisoner with them to a specific location? Are they going to have cells somewhere? Are they going to come back the next day to deal with that individual when they're taken before a justice of the peace? Because if the thought process is we'll just bring them in and then turn them over to the RCMP, I'm not sure that's overly helpful, because all that does at the end of the day is add more workload to an already overburdened RCMP detachment when a prisoner gets left or when a court file gets left. There's a lot of pieces to a file. It's not just arresting someone and you're done. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a court package. There's the results from court. If there is a finding of guilt in court, there has to be entries for criminal records. All of those pieces have to happen. And so is there going to be a return to a specific area to deal with each one of those pieces, or is that going to be centralized? All of those questions that we're still waiting to get answers for.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And I realize, cognizant of time here, we have one more question from our viewers, and then I'm going to move into closing remarks. So this question comes from Dane. What gaps are there in current laws governing judicial discretion in bail decisions that the provincial government should address? Rhonda?
Yeah, I can start. A lot of the bail decisions, I know there's been some discussion recently. I've seen some debate in the House of Commons on this exact topic. And, policing is a provincial responsibility. However, the laws that are required, many of the justices and judges are required to follow, often are created federally. And so they're not open that a province could ignore those or override them, that sort of thing. And it's very telling when we see, when we look at our homicides that have been committed in the last 5 years here in Saskatchewan, 48% of those homicides were committed by individuals who were on conditions, on release, unlawfully at large. There's something happening there, and we've seen this frustration. With our warrant enforcement teams, I talked about that top 60 list that's created of the most violent, most impactful individuals, negatively impactful on our communities. The problem is we don't get to 60 because they start working on number 1 and they get 1, 2, 3, 4. And then by the time they get to 6, number 1's back out again and has breached a condition or cut off an electronic monitoring bracelet or something has happened. So they don't get to 7 because they're back chasing 1 again. And, you can see it in our communities when I start seeing situation reports or briefing notes coming in a specific community. I've only been back here, 3.5 years in this position, but even I know, so-and-so is out of jail again, because you can just see that pattern. And it's frustrating when we see them coming out. No rehabilitation has occurred seemingly because they're returning to the same life. I kind of liken it to, if you're a construction worker and your boss tells you, okay, start building this house, and you make some pretty good progress someday, and then you go home at night and you come back the next day and somebody's taking it all apart, and your boss says, well, start over again. And so you start building the house again, and then you go home at night really proud that you got right back to where you were, and you come back and the house is taken apart again. That's kind of what our members feel like, and it's very frustrating for them to have to go through this. We had one community who, with a lot of time and effort, we were able to apprehend some very habitual and violent property criminals. And the community was quite upset with the RCMP because they said 3 days later they were back on the street. That's not our decision. That's a judicial decision. And unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to some of those requirements and regulations that have to be followed when it comes to bail decisions. And it's not a policing decision. So there's a lot of frustration within the RCMP. I can speak for myself and my members when it comes to those bail decisions and releasing some what I would categorize as violent criminals, putting them back on the street fairly quickly before one would expect that they should be back out.
Thank you,
And
Rhonda.
I'll just echo Rhonda, what Rhonda has said there, and say that the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police has met with the Council of the Federation, which is the premiers, and has worked with the federal government on addressing exactly those issues. And I don't know where those discussions are right now, but it is a discussion that is alive at the federal level, and we hope that we will see some changes that will prevent exactly what Rhonda has described.
Right on. Now, I'll just really quickly add that, again, you look at the stats, they get worse. They get worse. Crime severity index has gotten worse generation of generation. I would like to pull the stats 45 years ago when Chief Bourassa started policing and look at the crime severity index. It wasn't measured the same, but if we could measure it the same, and I think he would be able to say that prior to gangs, which came in around 1992, there was crime, but it's more properly related as opposed to violence related. We have drugs. Our communities are being flooded with drugs. So I guess what I'm saying is that what are the gaps? We look at an incident like James Smith and the recommendations that came from that inquest. I think police are really handcuffed, and because some of the release programs are very offender focused. And I think they need to really consider local leadership from a community, whether it's a mayor or a chief, and local police leadership to have a discussion as to, okay, are you okay with this individual being released? Who are the family we have to speak to, or the people who were victimized by that? And or else this person will be released. How can we support you to make sure it's a safe release and integration plan? So we have to think differently. And in Saskatchewan, we're trying something called Indigenous courts. There's only one other model that exists in Canada. That's in Sitka and Calgary. What it is, it's a revitalization, call to action 50 of Indigenous laws. And the reason why we're doing that is because it's part of Truth and Reconciliation, but also the stats keep getting worse, and it's time for us to kind of look at what we did as a majority population and shareholder of overrepresentation and criminality and victimization. First Nations need to take a grassroots approach to really look at the system and see if, as opposed to sending somebody to jail in the early stages so they become institutionalized and learn how to be a worse offender, can we do something at the start of their criminal activity to take a more holistic, historic approach to see if we could correct misguided people? That's a long answer to the question, and if I missed the part, I'm sorry for the person, but what an excellent question from whoever asked that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to all of you. Very, very complicated topic, and a lot of frustration. You're right, Rhonda. A lot of frustration turns to the police when it comes to bail and issues around bail, and unfortunately, that's way above our head and our pay grade. But thank you all for your answers, and thank you all for your insight today. I want to ask one last question, and I apologize to anybody. There's a couple questions we didn't get to. There was a couple repeat questions. I sincerely apologize if we didn't get your question. And I really want to take the time to thank the people who reached out to view this today, and there's people giving some great comments of support and encouragement for everybody on this panel and the agencies that they represent. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, for everybody keeping it very respectful in the chat. So as I look to get your final thoughts, one last question for each of you, and then you guys can take your turns answering it. If you could have just one thing included in the post-election budget, what would it be?
Okay, I guess I'll start that one. And this is going to be a big answer, but it would be to have police moved out of those domains that we shouldn't be involved in and have the proper agencies, proper resources involved. You heard me talk about the mental health and addictions area where we are the frontline responders more often than not. It would be good to have the professionals in that area deal with that and have those community resources available across the province. At the same time, getting us out of that whole court security and prisoner management and prosecution business, again, would put thousands of hours of police officers into our communities in this province. So the one thing is all of those things, let us police and have other agencies deal with the issues that they should be dealing with. So very often, when a law is written, it just tasks the police with dealing with this. And there are so many examples where we are the frontline providers for the Mental Health Services Act, the Youth Detoxification and Stabilization Act, and all of those sorts of pieces where other agencies should be bearing responsibility for that. It's taking police officers away from policing, from being visible in their communities, and from building those relationships we need to have with people in our communities across this province.
Thank you very much, Rick. Jason?
I'll go next. There's two things. One is Bill 26. The Saskatchewan government needs to follow through on that. That is amendments to the Summary Offence Procedures Act. It was a gateway, a vehicle for banned bylaws. So our First Nations create bylaws to address root issues on gangs, on antisocial behavior, on intoxication. We don't have that ability. Just through good relations with the RCMP, we could enforce that, but it's a very long process. Therefore, it doesn't happen very often. Second thing is once First Nations policing becomes an essential service, there needs to be heavy investment because every First Nation has that interest. There's always going to be a relationship and a need to have the RCMP at their complement to support this transition, and it'll be a long transition. But I would love to have had stakeholder consultation so that we could take a look and maybe redivert the heavy investment into marshals. And when there are a lot of irons in the fire and essential service legislation for First Nations policing, I would love to see a big commitment from federal and provincial government to bring that to fruition.
Thank you, Jason. Turn over to you, Rhonda.
For me, we were very fortunate in the spring that the province stepped up and agreed to fund us to what we call our annex, which is just an addition to the provincial police service agreement that the province has with the federal government. But one of the things that comes with resources is the other side of it, which is the O&M piece. So funding for all of the pieces that go with a police officer, not just salary costs, but including, there's additional vehicles, and vehicles need gasoline and need maintenance, and we need kit for that member, and we need clothing, and all of those pieces that come with that. So we're really hoping to, and we've been working with the province to see some of those increases as well on that O&M side to support that. Additionally, when you have new police officers, they all have to be staffed, and they have to be, their careers have to be reviewed by our HR folks. All of those pieces have to fall into place. So we need some of those operational support positions to make sure that everything keeps functioning smoothly. So that's the other piece that we're hoping to see down the road here.
Great. Thank you very much, Rhonda. So that wraps things up. I realize we're a little over time, but the conversation was excellent, and I think we learned a lot. And again, sincerely thank you to all of the panelists today: Rick Bourassa, Jason Stonechild, and Rhonda Blackmore. Wealth of knowledge amongst the three of you. Great leaders in this province, great police expertise, and I thank you all for keeping Saskatchewan residents safe, as do our viewers. And thank you to everybody who dialed in. I sense more of these in the future. It was a very great conversation, and lots learned today, and lots of questions and lots of discussion will come of this. So thank you to everybody, and good night to everybody.
Thank you, Morgan. Thanks for hosting.